A large part of the Russian grain gathered last year was gathered, what a surprise, on the occupied territories of Ukraine. And then this stolen grain was exported through the stolen ports of Crimea and Azov Sea. Isn't it obvious to the world and to African countries that they're actually dealing with a thug?
Yeah, well, the whole issue is stolen grain. You're absolutely right, and I think that certainly it has been documented in the sense of organizations that monitor the shipping data and other things with satellite data and other things have seen these ships leave occupied areas. The harder thing is to get an idea of the magnitude of these and then where they end up in terms of destinations. I mean, some of it, we have seen where ships have been tracked into places like Lebanon or other places, but I think that there is a lot of concern there, and I think some countries have done a very good job of publicizing these ships and trying to get public opinion against accepting those sorts of shipments. But grain, unfortunately, it has a way of it gets harder and harder to track once it gets to a country and other things. So again, to get a full idea of magnitude of this, I think is a bit more challenging, and it's also hampered by the fact that frankly Russia doesn't report or hasn't reported trade statistics for over a year. They claim they are going to restart, but it's been very difficult to get that data. So trying to do one's detective work, as it were, to try to understand where grains are coming from and where they're going has been certainly much more problematic. A lot of the shipment data, which is tracked via transponders, a lot of the traffic in the Black Sea transponders were turned off. So, and then mysteriously they would reemerge, near Turkey. So
Pardon me, even turning off the transponder is illegal, so you can track that point when it was turned off and everything. But exactly, that's a kind of a detective story more than, than a business. But there are buyers and there are sellers, and they will continue buying and selling because they have simply no choice.
Well, you're absolutely right that unfortunately one can always find a buyer for contraband. I mean, be it stolen grain or stolen anything, and I think that the world needs to be very clear about that. But it's tough. The tough thing, of course, is that it's food we're talking about, not weapons or not other sorts of contraband. And I think that but all the same, I think the idea of this being stolen grain, I think countries should be very wary of what they're buying and where this grain is being sourced.
Thank you. As a result of the destruction of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant by Russian troops, the loss of the agricultural products already amounts to about 2 million tons. The losses of the agricultural sector will only continue to rise over time, said Serhiy Labazyuk, a member of the Committee of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine on Agrarian and Land Policy. According to him, farmers will be forced to change the structure of sowing. A certain parts of the territories that were flooded will be able to return to work in a year or two, but there will be no irrigation. To use properly irrigated land will become possible only after a complete victory of Ukraine, the expulsion of the Russian occupying army from Ukrainian lands, and the restoration of the Kakhovka Dam, which is quite likely building a new modern facility, and that takes huge time and effort and money. Mr. Labazyuk also reminded about the risk of desert expansion in the Kherson region due to the fact, like I mentioned before, it is impossible to irrigate the land that is now prone to corrosion. If the destructive process begins, some areas, and these are vast territories that we're talking here about, will no longer be able to be used for agricultural production. This one will be more like also rhetorical. Obviously, the world is just not ready for a terror of that mind-boggling scale, that large atrocities, that ecocide, genocide, or let's call it foodicide attempt of Russia now, do you believe that in the future, after Ukraine wins, the international organizations are subject to change in any way? Or is our international, United States of whatever, and they will literally looking into the face of new war, will keep on expressing their deep concerns, and that's it, because this is mostly what they do?
Yeah, I know. I think in particular for, as you mentioned, with the dam infrastructure, this is going to require heavy investments to try to repair, to get this land. I mean, it already has seen the developments over the last 10, 15 years, and then to have this breach and in particular the destruction to the irrigation. I think it's important, it's obviously important not just for grain, but there was a lot of vegetable production and other things in that region, which, certainly is now jeopardized. And I think that this, we don't have to stop there. I mean, look at just the demining efforts of trying to give assurances to farmers that their lands have been decontaminated from arsenal and other things. I think this is going to be is going to require very heavy investments on the part of Ukraine's allies to help bring agriculture back. And some of that obviously can come from private companies and others who will want to see that happen. But I think this just says that post hostilities, I think there's going to be heavy requirements for, to bring Ukraine back to its full potential as an agricultural powerhouse.
The post hostilities. Well, if we talk about a list of countries that were damaged, harmed by disrupting almost everything on the food security market, on the food market and with the food security, what 5 countries would you name? If we say that Ukraine is first, the next 3 or 4 countries, if you can name them?
Oh boy, it's difficult. I mean, you'd have to go into the Horn of Africa, I think. I mean, if you're looking for historical examples, of course, you could go back to, the mid-century wars, World War II and things like that. But more recently, certainly Africa's had a lot of areas. You think about Cambodia, even, the wars in Southeast Asia. You still have areas there that have heavy mine concentrations and things like that. And yeah, I mean, these are horrible stories, and unfortunately for many of these countries, they're neglected, right? I mean, once the war has died down or the hostilities have died down, people tend to forget, and that's where the investments really have to come at that point. And I think that hopefully we won't see that with Ukraine. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to ask if Europe, in any way, is harmed and will be harmed more with all this situation, with all the shocks on the market.
Will be, I'm sorry,
harmed and damaged in any business or economic way, in any economic way, by this food insecurity, what is going on, because Russia went out of the deal, because Russia is shelling the harbor and port infrastructure. Do you think that Europe, because I have a feeling that Europe is just, at the moment, helping Ukraine a lot. Really, it is a fact. But also, it's like, bought some kind of a ticket or show and just waiting for how the deal is going to turn. Or maybe this is just my personal feeling, my personal.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have my sense. You would have better sense, I think, being where you are. All mine is largely from reading wire clips and reading statements from leaders. And you're right. I think at least on the political side, they've been very strong support. I think to me. The things that Europe probably could do a better job addressing is this sort of tension with countries like Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, even, in terms of saying, okay, look, this is what's going to have to happen over the next, while this war is going on, is that this is going to be a pathway for grain, and that if your farmers need compensation, then we can help with compensation, but not, let's don't use this as a point of conflict, because I think that's generally, my sense is that these countries have been very, very supportive of Ukraine. And to me, it's a shame that something like, all of a sudden to have these agricultural issues with people complaining about their prices in their country being lower. That is, I think that's true, but the fact is, well, then you can help that by compensating them, providing compensation, rather than necessarily doing something that ultimately penalizes Ukraine, because I think the main thing is to try to get this provide venues for this grain to get out, grain and other agricultural products to get out to the world.
You mentioned miles and explosives. Ukraine is currently losing huge areas of fertile agricultural land, in particular littered with explosives. Also, almost the entire south of Ukraine will remain with no water supply after the explosion of the Kakhovka Dam. To what extent has the war against Ukraine already affected and will affect the world markets? What I mean is prices, possible famine in some countries, a constant shock on the market. Is the market, the food market, the global food market, will survive? Or it has to be restructured, and it will be restructured by what is going on in any way? Or it will remain almost the same, just maybe waiting until everything, the storm is over, and then going back?
Well, I think it's more with a sharply diminished production capacity from Ukraine, which is what this war has meant, that it's more waiting for a disaster to strike. I mean, hopefully you don't have that, right? But the real concern to me is that because we're losing several million tons from Ukraine of grain that would normally make its way out to the rest of the world, that just means that other countries have to provide that. And, we have our global stock levels are at have been drawn down. Not just from Ukraine, but also from droughts and other things over the last 2 or 3 years. So that, when you look at wheat supplies or wheat stocks held by the major exporting countries, they're pretty low relative to world historical levels, probably the lowest since 2007-8, a time when we had very high wheat prices. And I think because of that, because we don't have large grain stores, means that if there are droughts elsewhere, that means the world has to find supplies, and otherwise we'll see high prices. And so, again, I liken it, again, please don't misunderstand. This is a terrible tragedy, particularly for the Ukraine people. But its effect on production is much like a drought, right? I mean, if you're thinking of a very large drought, a 30% loss in production, that would be seen as a catastrophic drought in many countries of the size of Ukraine. And so to think that you have a country that's having that sort of production effect, and if you were to have problems elsewhere, you could see prices rise very, very quickly. And I think that's why we've seen so much volatility in the global markets for both wheat and maize, is that the world looks and says, well, it looks like they're having problems in Canada for their wheat crop or whatever. And you see some increases in price volatility. Again, right now, ample supplies in the world, so prices have been at fairly low levels relative to the spikes that we saw in the spring of 2022 following the invasion. But prices are still high relative to where they were 5 years ago. And again, because stocks are low and other things, and the fact you have a diminished production capacity in one of the major bread baskets of the world, that's the risk, I think, that one looks at. So I don't think the world is complacent or waiting. I think we've been very fortunate over the last year to have essentially very good crops globally, and so despite the fact that Ukraine wasn't able to get a lot of its grain to the market, there was a lot of grain elsewhere. All it would take is a drought and another major breadbasket to have serious problems. And so hopefully we don't have those, but more importantly, hopefully we can return Ukraine to back to its pre-war levels at some point, sooner rather than later.
Yeah. You just took in my words what I wanted to say, dear sir. Thank you very much.